As someone who has not wanted children all of my life, I have spent all of my life being warned that my life would be irrevocably bad if I did not have children. I was told that choosing a child-free life was only going to make me sad, lonely, and depressed later in life. I was going to be a spinster alone with my weird clothes in my weird house with my weird little cats. And save the fact that I'm a bird person, that never really sounded like that bad of an existence to me. Like, that sounded like a good deal to me compared to the alternatives. When I was growing up, both in real life and in media, I seldom had good examples of child-free people who still lived happy, long, fulfilling lives. Like, the closest thing I really had was the nuns at school, and they were still married to Jesus, so it wasn't really quite the same as just like choosing to prioritize yourself and your own desires. But I remember how one of my high school science teachers actually was child-free. She was married, she had a husband, she was a teacher, she was a normal person who loved her life, who had a lot of time to do the things that she wanted to do because she had not had children. And pointedly, she was not somebody who was completely socially rejected or completely romantically rejected. She had managed to find a partner too, and that was really one of the first times that I gave myself like this idea that, hey, maybe it would be okay if I didn't have kids. And contrariwise, there is an abundance of media that presents the opposite perspective, the perspective of people that just mindlessly have children because that's what you're supposed to do, right? Like, that's the point of being a human, right? And that media very often portrays people like me as morally defective or not caring enough about the people around me or my own future or anything like that. And now that I'm a child-free person who has friends who have children, a lot of my friends, they complain about parenthood to me because very often parents can't be seen to be complaining about parenthood or their kids or anything like that because they're viewed as not being good enough of parents. Like, we very seldom look at the overarching circumstance of what it is like to be a parent and how it is universally hard for everyone, and everyone struggles and everyone has points where they're inadequate for their kids and for themselves. Rather than seeing it that way, we very often see it as those specific parents have those specific failings and it is their fault that they're in this situation. When in reality, a lot of people are being pushed to make very big, huge life-altering decisions without really considering them through, without really considering if that's what they want with their life, without really considering all of the limitations their life are going to have, all of the ways that they're going to need to prioritize their child above themselves if they want to care for that child well. I've seen statistics that show roughly 15% of American parents have regrets around having children or regret having children outright, but it is something that we often don't talk about because it is very difficult for people to divorce the conversation. Like, you can have great kids that are amazing, that you love and that you value and that you're glad are here, and still regret and resent your own parenthood, and still regret and resent all of the ways that prioritizing that child hindered and limited your own life. But unfortunately, all too often in society, we act like people can't have conflicting feelings about things, especially when it involves our children. If you are anything other than like 100% happy to be a parent and to accept all of the burdens of parenthood, you can be framed in other people's eyes as neglectful, as a terrible parent, and it's really toxic the number of ways that we hurt each other as people. But I think all of this puts me in a unique perspective to just step back and kind of take a look at the opposing side of what we are told that we should do, that we have to do. The idea that maybe for some people, for probably a lot of people, not having kids is a good decision. In this video, I'm going to go over some of the things that I've heard the most as a child-free person. I'm going to rebut some of the common arguments like, you'll meet the right man and change your mind, or, but you'll die alone. And to be clear, I'm not framing this as like the pros and the cons of having kids. I am framing this as like the way being child-free has impacted my life and things that I think people should know before they go through the process of having children. Why I don't want kids. I think it's best to start with this so people kind of have a framework of where I'm coming from. I've never wanted kids in my life, and when I think back to my childhood, I remember holidays and like this expectation that because I was a girl, I would watch my younger cousins, and I would be like, I don't want these children. Like, why am I responsible for these kids just because I'm a girl? And sometimes I was being made responsible for little boys that were actually older than me, and I'm like, why, because I'm a girl, am I the one who has to be responsible for this situation? I did not manifest this situation. I did not want these children. And as I grew, there were more and more circumstances, especially because I went to Catholic school, where it was really treated as like, hey, your purpose in life is to care and to nurture and all of these things. Me, I was more of a tomboy. I wanted to go outside. I wanted to play in the dirt. I did play house occasionally, a little bit with some of the other girls, but for the most part, I wanted to play things like fort and adventure and explore, and like all of the things that I wanted to do were not centered around that childrearing, I didn't have that same instinct that a lot of my friends did. A lot of my friends, like, you hand them a baby doll, even from a very young age, and they really just intuitively seem to know what to do with it. But me, when I was playing house as a kid, I would understand by the way that my peers were acting that I was not treating the baby doll the way they expected me to. And I just was very emotionally detached from the whole thing. It was one of those circumstances where I absolutely recognized that I was playing house for them because it was what they wanted to do, because I wanted to be able to do what I wanted to do and play what I wanted to play later. I went through a big shift as a human when I graduated from high school. When I went into the career world, 9/11 happened. I really kind of was faced with this, like, you need to grow up moment. And more importantly, a lot of forces outside of me were pushing me, hey, you need to start thinking about relationships, you need to think about boys, you need to think about getting married, you need to think about having kids. And so I accepted some of those things. I've talked in the past about how I am a late in life lesbian. It has taken me many years to actually come to terms with the fact that I am a lesbian. I spent 20 years dating men. I primarily dated men who either didn't want kids or did not have a strong opinion about kids. I did date one or two men who, like, wanted kids and I thought would make good dads, and because I thought they would make good dads, I thought that I wanted to be the mother of their children. I am really glad I didn't do that. I think it would have put all of us, especially the child, in really bad positions because I was living a lie. I was lying to myself. And when you are not, like, when you don't love yourself as a parent, I think your children can tell. Like, I know as a child, like, there were things that I could detect that my mom was insecure about. Children know. I think my children would have known that I hated every minute and I was just going through the performance because it was what I thought would keep me safe, what I thought would keep that person in my life that I was told was what I wanted. Like, I didn't have conventional attraction to men. I looked at a group of men and I decided which one looked the most, like, fitting for me. Like, I looked at the conditions around me, the people around me, especially the women around me, the things that they were looking for in men. I really took to heart a lot of the things that my friends told me about what they thought I needed, and I would just find the man that I thought matched that pattern best. And sometimes that was a man who wanted children, and sometimes I very much considered changing myself for that person. And like I said, looking back, especially because I did not know then that I had a disability. I did not know then just how profoundly ADHD impacts my life. I didn't know that I was autistic. There were so many things that I didn't know about myself. I have really severe hip and pelvic floor issues even without having had kids, and if I would have had kids without knowing all of that. And that's the thing. They push you to have kids so young. Women's issues very often get diagnosed very late. There are a lot of medical conditions that don't start to manifest into your mid to late 20s, into your early to mid 30s. And I really think because we don't take women's issues and women's complaints at the doctor seriously enough, that a lot of women think that they are in perfect health going into having children. Like, a friend of mine realized that she had EDS because her placenta ruptured when she was having her kids. She nearly died. And they would have been more prepared going into that pregnancy if she would have had more information. I now realize that I am legitimately phobic of having a child. I am phobic of the idea of pregnancy. If you tell me, hey, this parasitic worm is going to live in your body, I have the exact same, like, physical, visceral, emotional response to if somebody tells me they're going to put a baby in me. And I spent many years trying to ignore that sensation, trying to think that it was just, like, something silly, that it was something unimportant, when in reality it was this very visceral part of my brain telling me not to do something that I would hate. I do not like the lack of control that I already have over my own body given my disability and all of the things. I would hate it even worse if there was a person living inside of me that then added additional complications into balancing my own needs, but B, that I then started to prioritize above my own needs. And that was before I knew so many women, especially women with my medical conditions, that had had really severe, really traumatic things happen during pregnancy and childbirth. I know a lot of people that have had bad things happen to their placenta, and when bad things happen to your placenta, often there's a lot of BLLOD involved. Like, there are a lot of people that I know directly who had very touch and go situations. Maternal mortality in the United States is going up. It's not going down. It should not be that way in this day and age. Especially for Black women, maternal mortality is going the wrong way. Beyond that, we do not take postpartum depression and psychosis seriously enough. We have all of these women who end up absolutely desperate, so desperate that they will end the lives of their own children. And we don't realize that it is not necessarily just that one mother is bad or that one mother snapped. It is mothers as a whole, but especially mothers in very high control situations, are not doing well. There are a lot of things that happen that change your biochemistry as you have a child, and in that postnatal period, there are a lot of adjustments that you go through. There are a lot of adjustments that your relationship and the relationship with your family and the people around you go through. There are a lot of very anxiety-provoking and scary-provoking things that happen in that time, and I think one of the biggest central themes of this is going to be one of the reasons that I'm child-free is because we really do not support parents enough, but especially the parent that is actually giving birth to the child. Like, especially the way just mortality and overall healthcare and just the level of things that we just accept. There's this joke on TikTok of the list. There's this girl who does not want to have kids, and she has a list every time she sees like a mother talk about some horrible complication of pregnancy or childbirth or the immediate period afterwards. She notates it down on her little spreadsheet, and there are hundreds of different things. And we could and we should be working medically to make people be able to have kids more safely, but we're not. Instead, we're wasting all of that time and effort and money making more and more disenfranchised young people get pregnant and have no way of getting out of the situation. Learning all of the things that I have learned about having kids did not make me want to have kids anymore, and seeing the struggles that my parent friends went through, and more importantly, seeing the number of people in their lives would say, oh, hey, I'm going to help out, I'm going to commit, I'm going to be, I'll watch the kids, I'll do all of these things. Both the people that they were actually having the children with and the people in their extended family and then their extended sphere. And it's not always people trying to be bad, just things happen, and we're going to discuss that. Most of my friends did not go into having kids with having a lot of support around them. Most of the people that I know that have kids are 100% the support for their kids the large majority of the time. I think it's really easy to forget the fact that like as recently as like the 60s and such, it was fairly normal for middle-class families to have something like nannies, some sort of domestic help that came in the house. But obviously in the civil rights movement, when we started paying those people more fairly, because it was very seldom white people that were doing that labor. But it's really only been fairly recently, especially for people that look like me, that we have been raising our own babies, especially if we are, middle class or above. A lot of our families just do not have the framework to support good child rearing and development. And then a lot of my parents went into parenthood as people pleasers. A lot of us have mental illness. A lot of us have mental health problems. A lot of us believe that we need to earn love. A lot of us say yes to things that we shouldn't say yes to. And if there is one thing, if there is one group of people that have a lot of demands in society today, it is parents. And there is one type of person that you can be, and it's really terrible to not be able to say no. Well, there's a lot of type of people, but I think it's particularly bad when you are a mother and you're like at a PTA meeting, because those other people around you will notice you are a people pleaser like a hawk. When you are a people pleaser and you go into parenthood like that and you haven't really had the time to really develop your self-confidence and your own self-image and things like that, you don't say no to things that you otherwise would have probably said no to because you would have realized weren't necessarily beneficial for you to do. I am a recovering people pleaser, and I see the situations that a lot of my friends get into. I see the situations of overcommittal, and I understand that I absolutely would have been one of those people. I would not have been able to tell my children no as often as I would have needed to be able to do that. And that would have impacted their development and our relationship together as well. The most significant thing that really cemented how I felt about having kids, and specifically not wanting to have kids, is the number of people that I know, people that have good judgment, people that usually do not trust people who are bad people, but who married or who had kids with somebody who turned out to be an absolute toxic asshole loser. A lot of people that I know unfortunately ended up the victims of narcissists or people that use very similar tactics to narcissists, because like I've said on this channel before, if you are neurodivergent, those type of people, those narcissistic people, those people that want to harm and use other people, they recognize how they can use our unique neurodivergencies against ourselves so that they can take control over ourselves and our lives. And even me, when I was at the top of my game, when I was in a good job making good money and I did not need a man of my own, that tended to be the time period when I leaned into those terrible relationships the most. That was the time when I was accepting treatment from other people that I absolutely shouldn't have accepted, because I was getting a lot of criticism at work. I was getting a lot of pushback at work, and it made me really devalue myself, and the people that I was in a relationship also realized how much that was making me devalue myself, and they were welcome to take advantage of it. Like, sure, I've absolutely been in good relationships with good people before, but I have been in a number of relationships with really bad people that have really bad mindsets that have really hurt me and held me back, and I am so glad I never brought a child into any of those situations. And let me tell you something that's not going to make you happy. When I said earlier, those men that I thought were going to be those great dads, out of like, I'm going to say 4 of them, 3 of them are probably not actually good people, because at least one has tried to cheat on his wife with me, and at least one married the girl that he cheated on me with, and that just in general makes me think that they're probably not like the wholesome figures that I thought they were at first. I would say at least half of the people that I am personally acquainted with ended up in a marriage or a long-term relationship or a co-parenting situation with somebody who wore a mask at least up until the point where they were like locked down on paper, locked down with a kid. And it wasn't always some major thing. It may have just been they helped out with the chores around the house until the kid was born and then they stopped caring. But in an unfortunately large number of situations, they had married men that wanted to lock them down with children because they realized that with, 2, 3, 4 possible children behind you, it is a lot harder for you to leave. When you are pregnant all the time, it is harder for you to leave. When you have 3, 4, 5 children, it becomes harder for you to support yourself on your own. And like I said, I think a part of that is because a lot of my friends are neurodivergent, and a lot of those people get taken advantage of by people who are narcissistic or who have narcissistic patterns in their family and aren't narcissists themselves, but, perform narcissist behaviors because it's what's been modeled in their lives. And like I said, unfortunately, many of us don't get diagnosed until after the point in time when we would have started getting married and having kids. So very often we are finding these things out when we are actively being harmed by this person. The number of women that I know who basically were realizing that they were ADHD, that they were neurodivergent, and that their narcissistic spouse was taking advantage of them and pushing their buttons and then recording them when they went into a meltdown and using it as evidence that they're crazy and trying to use it as evidence of why they were going to take the kids if they left. But what if my husband wants kids, right? Surely I'm going to change my mind. Obviously, I've told you before many times before, I fully realized the fact that I was a lesbian when I was about 40 years old. I didn't even really fully admit to the fact that I was bisexual until I was 25, and I was on and off in the years intervening, really just trying to minimize the amount that I liked women because I was trying to succeed better at work. I did not want my life to be any harder than it already was. But for many years of my life, the biggest argument that I heard when I told people that I didn't want kids is, well, what if your husband wants kids? Surely you'll change your mind. Nowadays I hear, well, what if your wife wants kids? Surely you'll change your mind. So first off, we need to discuss one thing. We very frequently act like there is only one person that is ever going to be good for you, and if you have to change yourself to suit yourself for that one person, so be it. That's your one person. What if I told you that if that was your person, that they would have the same mindsets and opinions on critical values that you did? Like, surely, yes, there are people that do go through their lives and who do change their minds. But like I said, I'm 40 years old. I've seen a lot of my friends go through a lot of processes like this. And the people that have changed their minds about having kids have changed their minds for things that were unrelated to the person they were dating. Like, sometimes the person that they were dating was helping them go through a healing journey. Maybe they had trauma in the past and didn't think that they would ever be emotionally available to have kids. And they went through a healing journey that their partner was alongside them for, and at the end of that healing journey, they then wanted to have kids as well. if you change your mind for somebody else, you really need to keep in mind that that person is not guaranteed to be in your life forever. Even if it's a perfect relationship and everything is amazing, perfect, happy, hunky-dory, that person could walk out the door tomorrow and get hit by a car, and then you're a single parent. Having children is a big, big decision to change on other people's accounts, and very often when people want other people to change their opinion on having kids, it is to control them. It is to get them in a situation where they can't leave. I'm not going to say that it is the biggest red flag ever, but when somebody really wants kids and they're like actively dating people who don't want kids and are trying to change those people's opinions, I think that's pretty toxic. I think that's pretty controlling. I think that's trying to make somebody who's close enough into somebody perfect rather than just working to find somebody that already is on the same page that you are. Like, regardless of your age, regardless of your gender or all other factors, there are tons of people who just for whatever reason do not want to have kids. And also statistically, we know that marriages are significantly more likely to succeed if you start off on the same page about things like love and sex and money and kids. And kids is a really big one to disagree about, especially if you disagree about how specifically you want to rear the kids. But also, for every person that I can think of that changed their mind for a significant other and nothing went wrong and they're happy with their kids and there's no resentment or things like that, I can think of two people who changed their opinion on kids for a partner. That partner was trying to control them, or that partner was trying to make them into something that they weren't, and the relationship did not go as well as they wanted, and now they are dealing with being a single parent and that controlling toxic partner really using the children against them. And I think a lot of people don't really understand how bad these situations can get. Like, there was this trend on TikTok about scary dog privilege, which is like, you know, the girls that have the big scary dogs and they feel safe. And that always moves on to a discussion on scary guy privilege, you know, when you date the guy that everyone is scared of. But you really need to understand when you are dating someone, if you are in a relationship with somebody, that person is going to get angry with you. One day, you are going to do something careless or thoughtless, or you're just not going to be thinking, and you're going to hurt them, and they're going to get angry at you. And you are going to see them on their worst bad dog day. And you really don't want to see that person in court. Because so many people are now interested in casual relationships, we very often look fondly upon somebody if they're eager to settle down and get married and have kids. But often we need to step back and look, am I being love bombed? Is this person rushing me into a point where they have control over me, at which point they're going to stop being the same person again? Is this a person that's truly interested in a long-term relationship and really wants to settle down, or is this a person who is just rushing me because they want to have more control over me and they know with marriage and kids, I won't be able to go as easily as I would have been before? A lot of people are very insecure. A lot of people want to have control over their romantic partners. And one reason so many smart, talented, amazing people end up in these bad relationships with narcissists is because narcissists don't walk around with name tags on that say, "Hi, I'm a narcissist." They act like completely normal people at first, but they may seem like they're more interested in us than most people are. They laugh at all of our jokes and they buy us thoughtful presents and they're always there for us. And they're doing things that a lot of times are portrayed as very romantic in films. A number of things that happen in rom-coms that would be very creepy if they happen in real life, especially the speed at which people move on in relationships. I personally do not believe you should marry or have kids with anyone unless you have seen them really truly angry. Everybody has a point. Everyone has something that makes them angry. And over the course of at least 18 years of rearing a child, you're going to find those points. You have to be able to tolerate that person at their worst, and you also have to have that understanding that if the relationship goes particularly poorly, you may have that bad person directing all of their ire directly at you. And even if you're not going into a relationship with a narcissist or another toxic person, like I said before, just because you're going into a relationship with somebody who wants to have kids with you doesn't mean that you are going to have that person forever. We act like it is very uncommon for younger people to die, and yes, sure, statistically it is less common than older people dying, but when you're considering, at least 18 years to raise at least one child, you need to be prepared for the fact that a lot of things can happen over that period. You can do everything right and be with the perfect person in the perfect relationship and still end up rearing that child alone. But also, if you're not in a perfect relationship, if you are in a toxic situation and you do end up rearing those children on your own, are you going to be able to rear a child that looks like a person that hurt you if that person does cause you pain? Like I said earlier, if somebody really is like meant for you, they are going to agree with you on the big key issues. I think culturally, especially because of media, we have sort of normalized this idea that you can just find somebody who's close enough and you can mold that person into the right person for you. Or you can find somebody that you're not quite right for, but you can mold yourself into the right person for them. But that always relies on an element of living a lie, and I always argue that that is far more stress than it's worth. Like, as somebody who concealed my queerness by dating men, living a lie my whole life, it was not good for me. I really think it's one of the big reasons for a lot of my stress-related medical conditions. It was very stressful to hide who I was. Every single conversation I really had to consider. I couldn't, you can't reveal too much. And also, I think we have normalized this idea that if you love someone enough that you can overcome anything. And there are just some things that love can't overcome. There are many things that love can't overcome. And a big one is resentment. If you go into a situation because of your significant other, and then that significant other doesn't support you in the way you expect, or that thing ends up being worse than your significant other told you it was going to be, or you expected it was going to be, it's a fertile breeding ground for resentment. And I think resentment is one of the hardest things to deal with in a relationship. You can fix all manner of emotional things in a relationship, but resentment is particularly insidious because it gets away from you. It's like a worm. It just roots through the back passages of your mind and it springs out at the worst possible moments. And I know that there's going to be people watching this video right now in a relationship with somebody and you're reassuring yourself, oh, they won't do that. So did every single one of my friends who had that happen to them. We never think it's going to happen to us, but we really need to consider, if we're not going into situations with open minds, if we're not going into relationships, into child rearing with the full understanding of both the pros and the cons, the risks and the advantages and the disadvantages and all of those things, we're not making those decisions in an informed fashion, and that is a really big decision to make in an uninformed fashion. I don't think most people really sit back and think about how large of a decision, especially the way our society works and the expenses and all of the things that are associated with rearing a child. That is so much to ask of somebody to take on uninformed.
Apparently I ADD'd off and forgot to record the rest of this section, so look at these pictures while I talk. People very often aren't fully aware who they themselves are, who their partner is, what the risks to their body actually are, what their genetic profile actually is, because a lot of people can't afford that kind of stuff. I think there's often a perception that you're going to have more access to help than you actually get. I think a lot of times families really want to be supportive, but they have medical conditions of their own, or their employment status changes, or heaven help it if somebody passes. Everyday prices are increasing. Everyday services are getting cut. Everyday promises are being made that are intended to help people, but they very seldom come into fruition. And I know for myself, as someone who was quote unquote a gifted and talented kid, there was always this push that I needed to take advantage of my potential when I was young, and I was making all of these decisions about my career and my college and my future and all of that before I ever really sat down and was like, are these things that I can actually commit to doing for the rest of my life? The longer I spent in the wrong career, the more it chafed against me. I can't imagine if I would have went into maternity not actually wanting it, because it's not something that I've wanted, but so much media has told me that I should want it. And I know that the people that are going to click on this video the most are going to be other people who don't want to have kids, who are like, okay, is this the right decision for me? But I also know that there's going to be people that do want to have kids that are wondering, okay, well, maybe are children the right decision for me? Let me hear from somebody else. Maybe there are other options. Like I said earlier, it's gotten better in the past years, but for many years, there was so little representation of people that were happy and healthy and did not have children. And it is not a force that even exists in so many people's minds. I also think about the Duggar craze and the number of families who went into incredibly regressive church structures around that, and the number of people in those families that are going to have kid after kid after kid, that are going to be unable to leave the marriage and the parenthood that Not all of them are going to want, because not everyone is cut out for parenthood. And that's what I wish more of our media encompassed. Like, there's a relentless amount of pressure that we place upon parents because they're supposed to perform in so many different ways. And I think one of the reasons why I think about this so much is because Susan Smith and Andrea Yates and so many other examples I can think of. And you also have, oh my gosh, what was that guy who ended his wife because she was pregnant and whatever? We have a lot of people that are driven to really desperate levels, and I unfortunately think it's only something that's going to increase.
But also, people can, should, and will change. Like, a lot of people think that you just get to 25 years of age and that's the adult that you're going to be for the rest of your life. And sure, if you peaked in high school, maybe that's what you're going to do. But the people around me that have like the best lives and are most personally satisfied in all of those things are consistently learning, they're consistently growing, they're consistently developing. And some of them were in entirely happy marriages for, 5, 10, 15 years until a point when they realized that what they wanted and what their significant other wanted was different. Some of my friends married young and changed their mind on kids, and they ended up getting a divorce, and they're friends now, and now their ex-husband is now the honorary, godfather of the kids. There are so many situations where we act like a relationship ending is this like world-shattering thing that should never happen, but like, especially with as long as people live, and especially with as dissatisfied a lot of people often feel, I think we really need to consider like a relationship has value as long as you're getting like reward from it, as long as it's emotionally fulfilling the people that are involved in that relationship. After the point that it's no longer emotionally fulfilling for the people involved, like if you have tried to like go to therapy and if you've tried to make it work and you've tried to see each other's point and perspective, it is no shame to just be like, hey, we're different people now. Let's divorce. We'll find new people. We can still be friends. A number of people that I know had starter marriages that they're now people that they're friends with. A number of people that I know also had starter marriages with people that were very hostile and harmful to them, and now they have children with those people, and those people are using the law and their children against them. But at the end of 18 years of you and your partner raising a child, both you and your partner and your child should all be completely different people, and that's a good thing that you should all be working towards. But if you're in a relationship with somebody who can't or won't or doesn't grow, there is often this pressure to stay in the relationship, to try and drag them along, to try and make them come forward. And I know that there's that inclination, especially because so many people view divorce as a personal failing. But also, a lot of those people that were dragging behind that weren't personally developing, one of the reasons for it was because that wasn't actually the relationship for them either. They weren't compatible in some levels, or there were things in their lives that weren't happy that they weren't able to deal with, or there was no motivation for self-improvement because you had a spouse that was going to do things all the time. There are a number of people that I've known in my life that their divorce was really a catalyst, like going into a cocoon and coming out a butterfly. And I also just think about so many of the kids that I grew up with and had parents that argued, and my friends would be like, geez, why can't they just divorce? And especially when there was a knowledge that their parents were only staying together for them, it put a lot of pressure on the kids. It put a lot of resentment into this situation. And I think it's also important to remember that the burden of parenthood is often unequal. If you have a mother and a father and they both go to their boss and say, hey, my kid is sick, I need to go home, a lot of times the husband's boss is going to be like, well, why isn't your wife taking care of the kid? Like, even in 2020, there were circumstances when I heard male coworkers being told that their wives should be at home taking care of the kids, not them. If two parents and a child are out in public and that child acts out, it's usually the mother that gets shot all of the accusing glares. If a father even does the bare minimum to babysit his own kids, a lot of times socially he gets a lot of praise and support for that. It makes it often feel very unequal, and if the people in the relationship aren't aware of that and can't compensate for that, it can add this added layer of extra dynamic that can be difficult to deal with. Again, it's just another one of those situations that we don't really discuss before people go out and have kids. And like I said, one of the big points of this video is just parental support. What parental support? We have this whole saying about how it takes a village to raise a child, and then we're like, but no, you need to raise your child with two parents, and if you need anybody else to raise your children, your parents better have time for them, or you better have money to pay somebody else. Our society society is not structured in a way that gives parents support, because they realize if parents don't have support, they will spend a fortune trying to get support. And I've seen a number of times when a couple would have children because there was an understanding that one or both families involved were going to help take care of the kids. And I think a lot of times, a lot of people do have good intentions when they're coming forward and offering their services, but a lot of times if you're old enough to be a grandparent, you're old enough to have health issues. Sometimes your spouse gets a job on the other side of the country and then your support structure is entirely gone. Sometimes you have a moral dispute with your family and your family says, hey, if you don't raise your kid a specific way, we're not going to help you anymore. Some of my friends' kids started showing signs of being queer, and a lot of times the grandparents would be like, oh, ain't no grandson of mine is going to wear a dress, and it puts these parents in a position where they need to decide whether they can afford childcare or whether they can afford therapy for all of the queer bashing that their child is getting from their own grandparents' hands. And like I said, even if you agree on everything morally speaking, relying on older people to care for your kids is a very big risk. I had a relative who bought a house with a in-law suite type situation because they had planned for her mother-in-law to take care of their kids. And unfortunately, her mother-in-law ended up passing in 2 years. Like, things can change in a heartbeat, and you need to be aware of that. You need to have plans. You need to be able to be in a position to have stability around all of that. Unfortunately, our society really pushes us to have kids at the peak of our fertility when we're still young and dumb and don't have a lot of money and stability and support. I think if a lot of people truly realized how much it can wreck your body, how much maternal mortality is, all of these things, they would at least wait a little bit longer until they're in a better position before they have kids. And if you're pushing people to have kids in their teens and early 20s, like I said, that's before the age of onset for a lot of mental conditions, a lot of autoimmune conditions. If I would have had kids back then, I wouldn't have realized that I had EDS. I would have probably realized I had EDS the same way a lot of my friends did, by having my placenta rupture, by having my life and or the life of my baby compromised. I can barely care for myself. I am reliant on familial support to just in general exist. If I would have had kids, especially if I would have had kids with somebody who was a bad person who used those children against me, I would have to worry about their care as well. I have seen a number of my friends get 3 and 4 and 5 kids deep and have a tremendous toll on their body that they didn't really realize was going to be as bad as it was, because they didn't realize the kind of medical conditions they had, and then they're trapped. Like, even the ones that have really supportive spouses, it is very difficult to have one parent that has a complex disability, and very often the kids show signs of the disability as well, and because the parent's aware they have it, they recognize it sooner. And again, it would be one thing if we had societal support. It would be one thing if disabled people could know, hey, if my disability gets worse, I can have this support that'll make things easier. They're stripping away supports for disabled people, women and children, left, right, and center, while also stripping away, you know, and I'm not going to say it here. And I honestly do not believe that even the large majority of people that don't have kids until they're in their 30s, and they do so when they're married and they're financially secure and they have familial support and all of those things, I still think a lot of them don't really realize all of the physical and mental and emotional ways that being a parent in American society is going to have a toll on them. And like I said, I think it's one thing if you have had the time and the energy and the money and the emotional space to really figure out who you are and what you want out of the world and all of those things before you have kids, but very often people are finding out who they actually are adjacent to the children that they're raising. And a lot of people are realizing, oh, I'm not going to be able to achieve the things that I wanted to achieve because I had kids. Kids are so much time and money. People, by and large, really grossly underestimate that, and we really are cutting away any level of support that we previously used to have. And not only do people underestimate the time and the money, they underestimate all of the emotional energy that's going to go into it, especially because it is a very stressful world. It is a stressful world just to exist as a human without having to consider, this is the world that I'm sending my children off into. It is an incredibly hard balance to be a well-rounded human, and the best chance you have for your children being well-rounded is to demonstrate well-roundedness yourself, to demonstrate an ability to take care of your own needs and prioritize your own needs, even when things are struggling, even when your children have needs, things of that nature. Because too much of our society has told people to prioritize their needs last, and people that don't have their needs met are not well-adjusted, happy, healthy people. And children nowadays go through a lot of things that are different than the things that we went through as kids. Like, being on TikTok and Instagram nowadays is completely different than being on Neopets or Club Penguin or even being on Facebook or Instagram 10 or 15 years ago. There are so many risks from the internet, and cyberbullying is so much of a different animal than it was before, especially because you can take high-resolution videos of people and publish it on the internet. Like, think about the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to you in high school, especially if it was one of those things where nobody saw it and you're like, oh my God, thank God nobody saw this, or everybody would have been, I would have ruined my life. And now consider the fact that I know people whose children were filmed when they were at their lowest, when they were doing something most embarrassing, and then really struggled for years afterwards with mental health issues. And this is not one person that I've seen go through this. There are a number of people that I know whose children have been hurt these ways. And no matter what you do, because you're sending your child out there into the world, you can't control it 100% of the time. And if you try to control it 100% of the time, it is just going to make your child go to somebody else's house where they don't control the internet 100% of the time, and you have even less control over what they're doing there. You have less insight over what they might be doing at that friend's house. And the world and the economy as a whole is changing too. A lot of people have always gone into this concept of we're going to have kids and we're going to raise them and support them for 18 years and then they're going to move out. I think it is a fallacy to go into having children nowadays and think they're going to be leaving your house in 18 years. I think you're not thinking very sanely unless you have the trust fund kind of money where you can just give your kid money. The economy, the price of things, you really need to consider the fact that it is very likely to be a multi-generational home situation, especially as more and more climate disasters destroy more and more homes. If you want your kid to leave the day they hit 18, you shouldn't have kids. If you don't want a queer kid or you don't want a disabled kid, you shouldn't have kids. There is no way statistically, even if you biologically generate somehow the most perfect fetus ever and you have that fetus wonderfully born into the earth, they can go out and be hit by a car tomorrow and end up disabled. If you're not willing to have a disabled child, you really should seriously consider whether or not you should be parents. You have no way of knowing, especially with all of the disasters going on, especially with all of the medical stuff going on. I think a lot of people need to be prepared for the eventuality that a good number of our children's generation are going to be disabled. I also said you should not have kids unless you're prepared to have a queer kid. A lot of people think, oh, I'm not going to have a queer kid. What are queer people like? What, 1 in 100, 1 in 10? Very likely there are a lot more of us than that. If you have 2 or 3 kids, there's a pretty significant chance you're probably going to end up with a queer one. And no child deserves to be raised being queer bashed the entire time they're growing up. And when you have people that are homophobic or whatever that have kids and they act out their homophobic behavior in front of those kids are traumatized actively the entire time they're growing up. So much of my inability to love myself and my inability to be happy was rooted around the amount of time that I spent in Catholic church being told that I was going to burn because I liked women. And look, kids can be rewarding too. I said I wasn't going into the positives of having kids, but I am going to go into it for a reason. I don't want you to think that none of my friends like their kids. I have a number of friends that have kids and love having kids and love being parents, and even with all of the struggles of parenthood, they love it. By and large, they were all people who had wanted kids their whole lives or had wanted kids for a number of years before they went into their relationship, or who, like I said, healed alongside their partner in their relationship and their opinions evolved on that. But like, people that change their mind for other people, at least a lot of the ones that I know, are not as happy with the decision. People that have more support, people that have more financial stability, people that have a partner that has emotional availability to them, people that are a little bit older and know who they are and can tell people no. These are the type of friends that I have that love their children the most, that seem happiest as parents, that seem the less stressed about being parents. And a lot of my other friends do love their children and they love that their children are in this world, but a lot of them wouldn't necessarily go through the decision again, especially when I tell friends like this, like, if you knew your kid would just exist as a human and be the same person and you didn't have to be the one that birthed them and raised them, like, is that the situation you would prefer? And a number of them emphatically said yes. They love the people that their kids are. They're glad that those people are in the world, but they also recognize the amount of sacrifice they needed to make and the amount of personal harm that that took and the amount of psychiatric harm that it has done to them. And a lot of of people think that they can just suck it up and they can deal with it, but like I've said a number of times, emotional stress, emotional strain leads to physical ailment. You get disabilities very often from having a biological propensity towards that disease, yes, but also from stress. And a number of these friends do think that they would have been happier with their kids if they would have been more supportive, if they would have had more money, if their partner wouldn't have been so bad, if they would have been more prepared, but that was not the circumstance they went into. I've talked to a number of people who really feel like they were robbed of a good, especially the early relationship with their first kid, because they just were not prepared for all of the sacrifices that it would take and all of the time and all of the energy. Like they thought they knew, but they didn't have a good perspective. And like I said, so much of this really seems to go back to readiness. My friends that had the most ducks in the line, my friends that had the most emotional stability, that had a therapist on lockdown, that had a good relationship that was stable, these are the friends that are happiest with their kids and their situation. Very pointedly, often many of these people were people who waited many years, who did not have kids until they were in their early to mid 30s because they were waiting for that right person, because they wanted to be in a relationship for a few years, because they wanted to make sure that they absolutely knew that person, that you were on the same page, that they could grow together, that they would develop together, that that person was even capable of growing and developing in the way necessary for them to safely raise a kid together. And so many times these issues really compound, right? If you don't have financial support, that's a strain on your relationship. If your relationship is strained, you're going to take it out on your kids. All of these things just add up. The more of them you don't have in a line, the more things compound. But what if I change my mind? This is probably the question I get asked like the second most. Like, what if I just personally change my mind about kids? And I don't think that's going to happen. I think if anything, all of the things that I have learned about child rearing in society and all of those things have kind of made me feel like I'm okay not raising kids. Now, I will say there's one exception. If I were to date somebody and that person had kids that were a little bit older, I think I could be like a step parent to a child that already could meet its needs for the most part themselves. But also because there's just such a big gap in parental support and parental need, there are always children out there and parents out there who need help. There are always situations where you can make friends or your family or your found family. You can help them babysit their kids, or you can be a mentor, or you can be a big brother or a big sister. You can be a teacher. You can have a side job on the weekends when you volunteer at a children's hospital or a children's museum or something of that nature. If you think that you want kids because you want to have an impact on children's lives, there are any number of ways you can impact children's lives. If you change your mind a little bit later down the road, there are often situations where you can adopt or foster or things of that nature. And as you build community around yourself, you can often find more and more opportunities to get involved in children's lives and to help them develop. But I must have my kids because of genetics. A little eugenicist-y, but we'll address it. If you think that you have superior genetics, I can assure you, you probably don't. Like I've been saying this whole time, a lot of people in this country, especially if they are younger people, are not aware of the full extent of their health conditions or potential health conditions. Unless you have really analyzed your DNA, and even at that point, we don't fully know what everything on the DNA code is for. There are very few scenarios when a person is like legitimately genetically superior and should be procreating for those reasons. But if you have specific knowledge or skills from your family or your culture that you feel like you want to pass down, you don't have to do that through children. Like, I've known people that have felt like, I know this basket weaving skill that only people from the East Shore of Maryland know. Okay, teach other kids that are on the East Shore of Maryland there now. Document it on TikTok or something like that. A lot of people act like these are arts that need to be kept secret, but are they arts that need to be kept secret? Or are they arts that you keep secret because it makes you feel special, because it's something that you keep secret and you keep it safe? You can find a friend, you can find an apprentice, you can find a godchild. There are any number of scenarios where you can pass on the skills and knowledge and things that you have to other people. Like for me, I have a number of friends that have kids where I'm like an honorary aunt or uncle to. And while my content isn't really for kids, I think being openly queer as a queer elder on the internet is increasingly important, especially as they want people to believe that people like us don't exist, or that there's not many of us. And like just in general, we need to see like all of society's children as our children. Like the generations behind us are the generations that are going to be running the country, you know, running the old folks' homes when we're in them. We owe it to them for their sake and for our own to take care care of them as a whole. And the media has made a lot of money turning us against our children's generation and our children's generation against our parents' generations and things of that nature. I think back to when I was a young millennial, and then just one day on the news, every report was about how we're lazy and entitled and we don't want to work hard and things like that. And we now realize that it was just like the economy sucking being blamed on us, and that a lot of that stuff was just media spin. But it did a lot of serious damage to a lot of people's relationships with their parents or with their children, depending on which side of the, the dynamic that you're on. For a while, my parents did fall for that stuff. For a while, my parents did kind of view me as being lazy, even though I was going out and I was really busting my butt to work as hard as I could and to move up as fast as I could. But crucially, my parents were able to open their eyes at some point and realize, like, there's no way that this could just be Aaron, especially because so many other people are having this problem too. I want to wrap this up by just saying my life is fundamentally better by being child-free. I really don't think that I would be in the position that I am now. I don't think I would have been able to quit my tech career and do the career that I have always wanted to do for my entire life. I have wanted, well, not my entire life, but ever since YouTube came out in 2005, I have wanted to make videos. I love making videos. I love talking to people. I love storytelling. I love all of those things. But I put all of that aside because I was told that I needed to get a real job in tech and find a man and date a man, and that was the key to happiness, and that was what was going to make me happy. But that made me miserable for so many years. And a lot of my friends are stuck in that cycle of being miserable. Not necessarily because they're secretly lesbians, although I think some of them are, but because a lot of them, went into careers that they didn't necessarily love because they thought it was stability, they thought it was going to be security for the future, and now they're just not happy. They did not develop themselves, their loves, their interests, their passions the way they thought they were going to when they were teenagers. I've had so much more time to develop myself personally and professionally. I've had so much more time to figure out my mental health struggles, to figure out my physical health struggles, to get to the doctors and the procedures and things that I need to be able to be more functional. But you'll die alone with your cats, or in my case, like I said, my birds. This is another big argument that I hear, and men think it's a got you. I would be perfectly happy dying alone with my birds, but I don't think that's what's going to happen, right? Men very often die alone because they're not social, they don't develop relationships with people that actually care and nurture. Women very often come together in Golden Girls type situations and take care of themselves. I have hope that even though I haven't had children, that some of the children that I have had influence on in my life will think of me when I'm older and make sure I don't get eaten by my birds. And I'm just saying, my informal polls, even amongst my happily heterosexual married people, often place satisfaction with cats above satisfaction with husbands. So I'm just saying. I hope to spend the next however many years of my life developing a sapphic community around me and dying surrounded by that community. And I think it's going to be beautiful. If you like this video, I take a lot of looks at pop culture, celebrity, and just the current events from the perspective of somebody who's a late-in-life lesbian and child-free, if that's interesting to you, especially if you like Taylor Swift and like seeing her music dissected in interesting and different ways. Follow me and watch my other videos, because that pays my bills.